Hello, dear subscribers. It's great to see you, and hopefully you will be watching this wonderful interview. And our guest is Gенri Mьерберg, who is an architect from New York, whom we invited here to ТЕАМ University to not only talk about ideal campus, but also hopefully build the one. And hello, Gенri. Welcome to our nice studio, and I hope we'll have a nice conversation.
I think we will, because it's this is my third day, in Tashkent, and my first time in Uzbekistan, and all I've been feeling since I've been here is a sense of welcome, and you've made me feel that what we're doing is worthy and important and very hospitable. So I appreciate.
Thank you, Gенri,
being part of this.
Thank you very much. So last several weeks, definitely, we've been very much focused through Zoom conversations we had with you, and then last 3-4 days we've been really much drilled into the conversations about building campus, about creating great environment for a university, for ТЕАМ University. And before we move to that conversation with our subscribers on YouTube, I really would like you to ask basic questions about where have you studied, why you decided to become an architect.
Well, thank you. Well, if you want to, that's going to be a long answer, if that's okay. But my father was a home builder, and my mother was an illustrator. Yeah. And so I grew up in this environment of construction and design and art. Mm-hmm. And in the neighborhood where I grew up in Baltimore, Maryland, I had 2 older sisters, and we went trick-or-treating. Mm-hmm. And I remember my first trick-or-treating that I recall in our neighborhood. We went to this, all these different houses, and went to this one house which was very, very small. Mm-hmm. And very interesting. It didn't look or anything like the other houses, and somehow we were invited in the house to get our candy. Yeah. And I had to look around, and something struck me about it. I can't tell you exactly, but I went home and I said, Mom, we went to this interesting house for trick-or-treating, and we went to the library. Mm-hmm. And she got me a book about this architect. His name was Frank Lloyd Wright, who is the most preeminent, famous American architect from the turn of the last 20th century. Mm-hmm. And it did this one house in Baltimore, but he did about 2,500 houses, thousands of houses, but it was a very important, iconic designer. So that got me interested. So as soon as I saw this book and saw the house, that's when I decided at a very young age to become an architect. And I'd like to think the rest is history, but I started working architectural office when I was in high school at 15 years old. So I started learning the trade, how to draft and draw, and my father being a home builder, I actually designed my older sister's house. So before I went to architecture school, I actually designed and had a house built.
So you had a practical experience?
I had a practical experience, yeah, so I was very, very lucky. And then I went to college, and then I went to graduate school in architecture at Harvard University, and where I graduated in 1980. And it was a wonderful learning experience. Students came from all over the world, and it was a great environment and very stimulating. And I moved to New York when New York was just coming out of the recession, the 70s. New York was in bad shape. And it was an exciting place to go to. So, and I got a job in a couple of weeks moving there, and I worked for this firm. It was called Edward Larrabee Barnes, and it was interesting. When I started, he was basically my age now. I'm 66 years old, and so and he was well established, and he turned out to be such an important mentor for me. I stayed there for 6 years, and that's where I started learning and working on actually academic projects and college work. So that's how I kind of got interested. And the firm was well established, but they also had a lot of people who started the firm and then went on their own. Mm-hmm. And so I always had this idea that I would have my own business. So I guess I wanted to be an entrepreneur, some way. So and I'd always done some freelance work on the side for various different smaller projects, and I got this other larger project, and my daughter was about to be born in a couple of months, and I figured, well, if I start my business after she's born, it'll be very challenging, so let me start it now.
Good.
So
Like that.
exactly, so I always know how long I've been in business because I know how old my daughter is.
Well, you've mentioned in your slides, I've seen that you have worked together with your team in more than 100 projects, right?
Well, what I was saying is, what I meant in terms of the 100, thank you for using that.
Yeah.
It was, so I've been doing it since, I consider when I started my firm in '86, my independent company, but over the years, I say I've been worked on a number of about 40 projects related to educational work.
Okay, yeah. So that's what I was going to ask about. Well, just to draw that line, you've done your bachelor's in UPenn.
Yes.
Yeah, and then you've done your master's in Harvard, and then you worked as an employed specialist. But at certain point, as you draw a parallel with TEAM University, you became an entrepreneur. You launched your own studio.
Well, I was in my head. I don't know. I had this. As a young man, whatever it is, I said, by the time I'm 30, I need to have my own business.
That's wonderful.
And so that was it. So I was turning 30, so I needed to get on this.
Cool.
And I think it's an important thing. And I think, and that's what's interesting, just learning what's interesting to me about your university. First of all, I never worked with a university that's about entrepreneurialism. And I never worked with any educational institution that's only 2 years old, or whatever it is, only been, or a few years old. So it's very exciting for me at this stage in my career to be working with a startup in education, because I've seen so much, and I've made a lot of friends, and I've learned a lot, and I've made some mistakes, and I've learned from those mistakes. And so I'm very interested in sharing with you and your institution all the things that I learned to do right, and how to avoid all the things not to do right, do wrong, I should say. And so I've seen a lot, and so I kind of feel at this stage of my career, it's an interesting opportunity to give back.
Exactly. That's so great. And thank you for accepting this invitation to be with us here. And obviously our chairman of the board of trustees, Andrew Waffel, who introduced you to us. And I am really enjoying this process. As you said, we've been going through a very startup phase, and founders and the students and faculty members and staff, they all have their initial kind of thoughts and aspirations. But again, we are just planning our campus. But going back to your experience in educational projects, you've mentioned that you have participated in more than 40 educational projects. Could you please share your views on how a university, a young university, should approach this important question of building its own campus? Because interestingly, we have noticed, and Ibrahim, who is working along with you, and many other experts, architectural firms here in Tashkent, whomever we approached, had never had any experience of building anything for educational, higher education institutions like universities. Because for decades, we didn't have any private institutions, and whatever we had probably was from the Soviet legacy. So what would be your advice to us as a young institution? But I hope that this is not going to be only watched by students, but maybe our colleagues who are also thinking about planning to launch higher education institutions or educational institutions in general, because we believe that competition is great. We believe that everyone will be benefiting from flourishing higher education industry. So what would be your initial recommendations of how we should approach this question?
Well, the thing that I've learned, and I kind of go back, this is into the late 80s, early 90s, when I was working on a campus project at Bryn Mawr College outside of Philadelphia. And the president of the university is this amazing woman, Mary Patterson McPherson. And I had originally worked at that college campus when I was with this other firm when I was starting out, coming in the earlier 80s, Edward Barnes' office. And so I'd done a computer center building with this other firm, I was a project architect. And then later, when I started my own firm, I continued to consult for the firm I used to work for and for the college. And so I had this relationship with the president of the university. And not to mention, also my wife had gone to that college as well. And so the president was it was an all-women's college. He says, I feel comfortable hiring you because you're married to a Bryn Mawr graduate. But to me, I guess my point is the most important, the recommendation is what you're doing is you're building relationships with people. And that's how you succeed, and that's how you grow, and that's how you learn. And so from what I learned in that particular experience and what Pat McPherson had said, we were planning a library building on the campus. And her charge to me is, I want to make sure that the building creates a sense of community that helps to bring people together, because very much the tradition in American universities, to a large extent, where I'd gone to college and even graduate school, the different departments were these different silos. You know, English department, math department, science, and they didn't interact. You were just in this funnel, and the institutions or the different departments had their own building.
I see.
And so the idea of the library was to say, well, the college president was interested, how do we bring the different departments and people coming together in one place? Because that's, we believe, the value of education is the cross-breeding of ideas, not just one idea. And so how do you build a building that builds community? So that's the thing that's stuck with me. So my advice to you is, you're not building a building. You're not just building a campus, you're building a community. And the campus and the building are the tools in relation to everything else you're doing, your vision, your mission, the pedagogy, and the people, and the building are all part of something that's creating a sense of community. Because when there's a feeling of sense of community, then it becomes a place where people want to learn. And there's a free exchange of ideas. And the most important feeling that I found in education is that it's okay to feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, and not feeling, oh, if I have to have the right answer before I say anything or do anything. And how do you create an environment where it feels comfortable, you feel welcome, and it engages and makes you feel empowered to actually take a chance. And learning, and I love the fact that you're saying it's like so much about making a mistake, learn how to fail to succeed. These are such key principles. And so we need to create a building that conveys that.
I see.
That it says it's okay to try something.
So you're saying that a campus, let's say, is definitely an illustration of the vision of the university, right?
Yes.
So it's not just bricks and mortars, it's
No.
not just concrete and just the roof.
The bricks and mortar are the tools, you know, they're the sort of ingredients. It's not the meal, you know?
I see. So then architect is not necessarily an expert in the field of technical, let's say, skills, but also he or she is the person who would integrate all the knowledges and all the stories he or she hears from key stakeholders. Is that right?
I think that's an interesting way of saying it. It's very much, I feel an architect is a storyteller with space. And
he tells the story, listens to the stories.
In other words, you have a narrative. Yeah. TEAM University has a message and it's a story. Yeah. And so that story is then conveyed in bricks and mortar, and the spaces between that are created by that. And so it has to be distinct. You know, it has to be your story, your campus.
That is really inspiring, and although it seems to be easy to understand, but I think the most difficult is to really implement that, right? I mean,
yeah, but isn't that the whole point of entrepreneurship? The power of translating an idea into something that's executable?
Absolutely.
And the most important thing that, again, that I've learned, you know, over the years, and being an architect and someone in the design, is the conviction to put ideas out there that haven't been tried, that may be unique. The thing is, doing architecture, every project is different, every client is different, every setting is different. It's not like we're making a product that's just mass produced. Each time, it's a couture You know, it's a customized thing. And so that's, I think, a very important aspect, I think, with entrepreneurship, is that it's a customized idea that's very, very specific. And it's not just, you know, producing something. So you're not producing accountants, okay, who are taking, you know, information and packaging and the numbers. You're not number crunchers. You are creators.
Absolutely.
And so it's, I don't know, I feel that I'm learning something about being an architect by understanding how entrepreneurs think. So so thank you for this.
No, that's
it's like I feel like I'm in a seminar this past week.
Well, definitely, because in your sessions, when you spoke to our students and faculty members and even founders, you have started asking them a question: what would be your analogy to entrepreneurship? Yeah, with 1 or 2 words. And we were seeing different answers, but they were really complementing each other. And I believe that was not just to ask for the sake of asking, but really gathering information about what people see in the entrepreneurship, how they would like to spend their time, in what situations they would like to develop their entrepreneurial skills, right? So that's fantastic. May I ask another question? So having worked and developed more than 40 educational institutions, and you've mentioned that you are already, yesterday you were joking that we've done some calculations when we came up to a figure of 120,000 hours spent in architecture, right? And that's huge. So it's not 10,000 hours, it's 120,000. It's a huge, really, experience. So how would you assess the trends in building educational environments or spaces or campuses? What has changed throughout these 40 years?
No, that's a really interesting, you know, question. I think what's changed is that there's a real desire to understand that to break the barriers between disciplines, to be more interdisciplinary in terms of thinking, and in some ways, I think it's been a trend towards where students are not seen as like a monolithic mass. Like, oh, we're feeding them information. It used to be the idea of teaching pedagogy was the phrase is sage from the stage. Okay, and now it's much more the students are part of the teaching and learning experience. Teachers aren't just teachers, they're also learners too. And so there's a blur, the boundary. And so these trends in education, in the flipped classroom, learning by doing, and these are things that I understand, and those seem very resonant to the spirit of entrepreneurialism. Absolutely. About taking, in other words, a student isn't something who's just being fed information. They also have a responsibility to interpret that information, to criticize that information, and to create information. And so we've been trying to create buildings that are less about, oh, this is a place where I get information from, if I'm an educational, it's not where I'm retrieving, or this is where information is getting, I just sort of get it and it's fed to me. It's, I have a responsibility to actually find it, discover it, uncover it, share it with others, do it collaboratively. And learning used to be very much, oh, I do it myself, I go to my room, or I go and I'm reading Carol, I read my book, and it's a kind of individual thing. Now the classroom is much more of a lively, interactive place. It's participatory learning. And I think that's a very key word that I learned thinking about the future was a conference at, this was about 10 years ago, it was a conference held at Salzburg Global Seminar, Salzburg, by the matter of fact. And it was this institution that was established about creating global leadership. And they invited a group, and they had this fellowship program, and I was invited to be participant with people doing thinking about the future of libraries and museums, and it was the idea of the future of those institutions in an era of participatory culture, and realizing that those institutions realize that their sustainability, their viability, their relevance in the future was the extent to which they engaged their audiences in that they were participants in the experience, I see. Not just spectators, or not just showing up for the experience. They had a responsibility to participate and do things. So learning by doing, is there something more specific that's not entrepreneurship than that.
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
is all by learning, by doing,
Yeah,
I think.
absolutely. No, these are great insights, and I think it is really the case. I mean, I remember myself studying, and that was relatively recently, I mean 15, 20 years ago, but I remember the campus, we wouldn't call it a campus, we just wouldn't call it a building, yeah, of our university. And that was not friendly, a lot of corridors, no windows in it, and no social spaces. So mostly what we have seen was the classrooms. And we wouldn't know where to put ourselves besides for the classes. And unfortunately, it is still the case with 90+% of the educational spaces in Uzbekistan so far.
Yeah.
So with our campus, we really would like to be distinct, and that's why we are relying on international practice, on recent trends in education and overall in entrepreneurship, as you said. Would you mind to comment on your own experience of teaching? Because you have mentioned that, and I've seen it on your website as well, that you have spent several years teaching at Columbia and Harvard. So how was it in terms of being within that process? Did you enjoy it?
Well, it's interesting, you know, teaching in, let's say in the architecture realm, and I was mentioning earlier, I did this earlier, you know, 20 years ago I was more involved in teaching, and it's interesting, my wife is now encouraging me to sort of like, you should get back into teaching, and people have asked, oh, you should write a book, you know, and so actually, I feel that it might be my next stage is actually returning back into teaching more, because I think when I was a teacher then, and a critic, you know, and a guest critic a lot of times at institutions, it was really about me, saying what I thought. And it was less about listening to what other people were, listening to the students. And so now I think I'm much more interested, and that's why I think that's why I was interested in our group yesterday, the people, is ask them a question first.
Yeah, absolutely.
Before saying what I think. And it's all about, I mean, teaching to me is about bringing the talent out of other people, not sharing my talent with them.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so, but it's that dialogue. And to me, you know, the other kind of phrase I use, that architecture is not a soliloquy, it's a dialogue. And that's what learning is. It's not one person telling something information.
Yeah.
It's about the exchange of ideas.
No, that's great, because at TEAM University we also put a big stress on practitioners' knowledge, on bringing practitioners on board, and let students ask questions and share their own thoughts about trends, the business fields, study specific cases, both in Uzbekistan and abroad, and hopefully we'll continue doing that with you as well. So at a certain point, sharing your own experience with our students as well, that would really be great.
Well, that would be actually, that'd be interesting. I would like to do that, because you know, when I was in architecture school, I learned more from my fellow students than I did, you know, from professors.
Absolutely.
And I think that would be the same true today.
Yeah.
I think you know, fresh minds, you know, have fresh perspectives.
Yeah, they challenge you.
They challenge
from
you,
their
exactly.
own perspective. Great. Henry, last but not least, I would like you to give some address or a message to our subscribers, to people who watch us, and those are students, people who are interested in entrepreneurship. These might be parents who are watching their kids choosing their education. So what would be your address to young Uzbek generation, or to those who are living in Uzbekistan? What would be your, let's say, some of your impressions or thoughts based on your trip and based on this project?
Well, you know, my impressions are still information. This is my third day here. In my first time, you know, ever. And my impression so far that this is and it's interesting, when I came in here this morning, there were a few students sitting there working on a jigsaw puzzle. You know, and there was like 5 of them, and they were working on this puzzle together, and they just started. It wasn't like they were nearly finished. And it's, you know, it's a puzzle of 1,000 pieces. And they're sitting at a table. And and they kind of saw me, and they said, "Oh, hi," and I go, "Hi. Oh, are you a teacher here?" You know, just say, and I go, "No." I said, "Oh, you're an architect involved, thinking about the campus of the future." And they said, "Oh, sit down." So here it was, these students.
Yeah.
I was the stranger. I was the you know, coming in, and they asked me to sit down, and here they were working on this puzzle together. And isn't that the most amazing kind of metaphor? And here they were the puzzle of learning, the puzzle of education, the puzzle of what your life is going to be, and they were taking it on, working together. It wasn't like this one person working on the puzzle. It was a bunch of them. So my message is, you know, to students is that there's so much uncertainty this time, this era that we live in. The United States has lots of uncertainty. The global pandemic has introduced and put a spotlight on so much uncertainty. The thing that you can be most certain about is the interaction you can have with other people, and learning, education is the way to navigate uncertainty. And so the most important message is to strive for education. Learning is a lifetime process. It's not just about going to school. It's a lifetime process. I'm learning every day.
Cool.
So my impression is of this city and the people here is that, like I said, the city it feels immaculate. It's so well kept, and it's so festive. The lighting at night for the holiday. There's a sense of joy here. I think people seem to enjoy life. My impression of Uzbekistan that this was a country that was not a place of free exchange of ideas, you know, for a long time. And so there's a feeling of and the students sitting there today were confronting this puzzle, you know, an uncomfortable, you know, challenge, and they were doing it with joy, and they invited me to participate, a stranger. So I think there must be a spirit here in this country, if that's an example of it, of that we can tackle anything, that we will invite strangers to participate with us. I think that bodes very well for the future of this place. So, I mean, if any way that I can, you know, participate and contribute what I've learned over the years, but there seems to be a foundation here, a curiosity, an interest, a passion about doing something. You can't teach that, but you can build a learning society and a strong economy with people that actually have this curiosity and a drive and are interested in other people. So I'm totally optimistic for you guys.
Thank you very much, and looking forward for our cooperation. Thank you for this wonderful interview.
No, thank you. It was a pleasure.